On this episode of Locked On Lightning, it's trade talk galore. All the possibilities, all the news surrounding the Lightning for the trade deadline coming up, and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Locked On Lightning. Just a reminder, today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we got a lot to talk about trade-wise for the Tampa Bay Lightning. They have yet to make a move, but we'll be covering some topics from the least possible, the least acceptable move, the bare minimum is the best way to say it. The bare minimum that the Lightning can do at the trade deadline. We also react to what transpired on the Jeff Marek Show today, as well as talking about maybe the easier decision isn't always the best. What does that mean? Stick around for the end of the show. But before we grab any of those topics and discuss them, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube, so go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification button as soon as the newest episode drops, and you'll be notified, and you'll be able to watch it, you'll be able to listen to it, be able to absorb all this crazy, well, I wouldn't say crazy, but trade talk galore that I'm excited. I'm going to take a second real quick to just reflect on the interesting position we are in here at Locked On Lightning, a position that we really haven't been in before, because I spoke about it a little bit on last night's episode, but this is a very weird, uncharacteristic year for us on Locked On Lightning, and because the Lightning are the underdogs, and we really don't know what's going to happen at the trade deadline. You know, years past, we've been spoiled. We've been lucky. All the Lightning have had to do, obviously looking back, they probably had to do more, but all they had to do, or at least they thought they had to do, and we thought they had to do, was pick up a piece or two at the deadline. That's not the case. There's a lot of question marks flying around now for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And one of those question marks, or one of those those interesting talking points that I think that maybe is not really being discussed at all, or maybe not enough, is what is the bare minimum acceptable move that this team could do at the deadline? Because it is very well documented. It's been talked about here. It's been talked about all over on other outlets. It's been talked about on Marek, that we will talk about in a little bit. But the Lightning don't have a lot to play with. I mean, they do if they're creative. We've spoken about it when I did my mock trade with the Calgary Flames. If they really want to get creative there. But what is the bare minimum that the Lightning get back this year at the trade deadline, regardless of how you feel about their situation standings, whether you think that they still have a chance to make a deep run in the playoffs, or you're kind of more on my side, thinking that, not so much that they're going to miss the playoffs, but if they make the playoffs, they're not going to go far really at all. But now we ask the question, regardless, pushing that aside, because I am a firm believer, unless you're 100% have a chance to contend for a Stanley Cup, that you shouldn't be making trades at the deadline and trying to throw home runs. And we've seen what happens when you do that last year with Tanner Jeannot. That ended badly. And I know we've trashed Julian Brees-Boss quite a bit here on the podcast, as well as pretty much everybody. But I think a lot of that had to do with him thinking, as I'm sure some of us did at that time, that that was going to be the last puzzle piece to be added, and obviously not. It was not nearly enough for the Tampa Bay Lightning. But now we ask ourselves, what is the bare minimum? What can Julian Brees-Boss do that would be acceptable, or like what the least that he could do? And I think that it has to be a defenseman. I firmly believe that when you look at this team, the one thing that has plagued them all year long has been their defensive struggles. And I think that when you look at this team for next year with this roster, if you keep this roster intact, which that's an unrealistic thing, that if that happens, that means that the Lightning are not setting themselves up for future seasons. That next year we're going to have somewhat of the same result, and this organization is going in a not so good direction. But I think the responsible thing to do here is look at it this way. If you're the GM of the Lightning, is that I firmly believe you could always find scoring, especially in today's NHL. I think nowadays it is very, very hard to find solid defense. And that's, of course, because that's a product of the fact that there's so much offense around in today's league. And I think that, as we've seen in years past with the Lightning and other Stanley Cup winners, except I think the Knights could probably be an exception because they were just an offensive juggernaut last year, and they added a couple of pieces as well, and which is why I think maybe they'll repeat. But I think that you look at the formula, the general formula. Lucky scoring, opportunistic scoring, solid defense. And even that year, the Lightning lost to the Avalanche. They had phenomenal defense. Solid goaltending as well. And the Lightning, I think we could agree at this point in time, especially, and that's what plays into it as well. Going forward, we can't sit here and confidently say that the Andre Vasilevsky of old is ever going to come back. There was a comment under one of our YouTube videos, one of the last couple of episodes. You know who you are when I say this. You made a very good comment about how Vasilevsky is now an average goaltender. I think you went along the lines of also saying, and I'm loosely quoting, so sorry if I get it wrong, but Vasilevsky right now is very bad to average. And I think that's an accurate thing, and I think it's a reasonable thing to say, which is why putting the emphasis on a blue liner, and I'm not talking about a rental for this year or the next year, or I want a guy that has term. I want a guy that's going to come in, even if his contract doesn't go beyond next year. I want him under team control. That's an RFA. I want this guy to know going forward, whether it be for the next couple of seasons, whenever his term is up, whenever he goes from RFA to UFA, and then goes into his first contract year, that this guy is going to be a Tampa Bay Lightning for the long term, that this is going to be his house. Amalie Arena is going to be his house for the next 3 to 4 years. And you could get that with Noah Hanifin. He is a UFA after this year, but I think that he's young enough, and he he's, Tampa Bay's a great place to play. I've never heard a bad thing about it from anybody who's ever played here. But this would be a good chance for him. But I don't care if it's a Noah Hannafin or someone who's a little bit lower down the pecking order on the defensive side of things. So let me know. Do you agree with that? Do you think the Lightning should go defense? Should they go offense? Like I said, I think there is a surplus of offense in this league. And what has been always the case for winning championships in this league will continue to be the case for winning championships going forward, and that is defense. So let me know in the comments below. And coming up, we're going to react to the interesting conversation that was had earlier today on the Jeff Marek Show. I'll get into more of that and I'll fill you in because someone brought it to my attention and it was a very interesting comment that was made entailing the Lightning. So coming up in a little bit, we'll touch upon that. But first, we're going to talk about our first sponsor of the day, and it's our friends over at the Sleeper app. Now, we're almost towards the end of the NHL season, and the Lightning are teetering on the sweet spot of wild card playoffs and missing the playoffs entirely. But regardless of where we are in the current standings, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick guys like Braden Point and Nikita Kucherov to record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minuses, or more in a game. So use the promo code Locked On NHL and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code Locked On NHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. So as always, I want to thank everybody for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We love hearing from all of you on our YouTube channel as well. That's why I implore you to subscribe to the channel, hit that thumbs up button, comment below this video. Let me know if you were the GM of the Lightning, what direction are you going at the deadline? I mean, we are 3 days away from the deadline. I don't care what anybody says. This is a very crucial part of the season, and it could very well determine next year, depending on who they get and who they don't get at the deadline. And there's been a lot of talk about that around the league, obviously, regardless of how people may feel about the Lightning, people are still keeping their eye, as they are always in the conversation when it comes to potential trade targets this time of year. And there was an interesting conversation had on the Jeff Marek Show. And if you're not familiar, Jeff Marek is one of the most known personalities in the hockey media world. You may know him as a co-host of 32 Thoughts with him and Elliot Friedman. He has a very good hockey radio show every day. I believe it runs for like 3 hours. They also have it in podcast form, so you could always listen it to there. It's on Sportsnet 590, The Fan. And if you've been a listener of my show, I try to, most of the time, when it comes to news or other things said on other outlets, especially if it's in, podcast or radio format, or I try to keep my nose away from that, because I feel like, we kind of are along the same lines of what we do here. And, I wouldn't want someone blowing up my spot about something maybe I have said on this show. And I'm sure I say a lot of controversial things from time to time here. But considering this did not really involve Jeff Marek himself, and, a little bit more backstory, they were talking about, and they had Jason Bukala, who I'm not really familiar with his work or anything. All I know is, or I would assume so, that he is a hockey writer in Canada. And that kind of says a lot if you've been around hockey media um, about what I'm going to say, is that they were talking about the Noah Hannafin trade and discussing if the Lightning had the assets to make such a trade. And I don't know if this was said out of seriousness. I don't know if this was said out of jest. I don't know if this was said to get people from the Lightning world, such as myself, to be out here right now and talking about it. But basically, long story short, they were listing off players on the Lightning who would possibly be involved as the trade chips for Noah Hannafin. And Jeff Marek stated Tanner Jeannot, and I think that's more so he was stating that from wishful thinking on behalf of the Lightning fans, and that's rightfully so. Tanner has really not lived up to the impossible expectations that have been laid before him, given the trade that would happen for him just last year. Now, Mr. Bacala, and I hope I'm not pronouncing his name wrong, and I mean this out of the utmost respect for this guy. I'm sure he knows his stuff, but what happened, and you can look at it's on Twitter. I retweeted it. Go to @DankyDank, DENKYD8NK. He basically said that Tanner Jeannot is an interesting name, but the name that would move the needle for the Flames to possibly go forward, and I'm speaking out of context right now, I viewed this video probably like hours ago, is that Brandon Hagel would be more of a trade target or piece that would make more sense, in which the Lightning would get Hannafin back. And I am 31 years old, going on 32, and I have never said this phrase in my life, but I'm going to say it right now, is stop the cap. Stop it. Stop it, okay? And for those of you who don't know what that means, it basically is this younger version's way of saying that's BS. And I'm saying that because nobody in their right mind, unless they don't want to keep their job, would ever, especially with the way he has played, especially with how this team has played with him, would ever trade Brandon Hagel. I don't care. Like I said, this could have been just him messing around. I don't care. You don't joke about Hagel like that being traded away for Hannafin. Hannafin's a good player, and if you've been listening for a while, you know that's my number one target. But at the same time, I don't want Hannafin that bad that I'm willing to give up Brandon Hagel, who is going to be part of the next the next generation of Lightning great players. Because make no mistake about it, trading Hagel after what they did, what they gave up for him, and then subsequently the following year going ahead and making that trade for Jeannot, if hypothetically Julian Brees-Bos were to make that deal, I wouldn't be surprised if the Lightning miss the playoffs, and then he loses his job. It's one of those things where it's such an idiotic comment to make, where I firmly believe that was done to get a reaction out of people like me, who are in the Lightning circles. And congratulations, you succeeded. Now, on the other side of that, it's almost the kind of thing that I would kind of expect from a Yankee fan. And I've heard this, and no disrespect to my Canadian colleagues at all, but it's something that I have seen way too often. And this doesn't go for the Locked On hosts, because those guys and gals are class acts. And I know they would never say anything like this, because they know never in a million years it would ever happen. But I think it's one of those things where they feel like they could take advantage. It's one of those things also, they could take advantage of the Lightning because, yes, the Lightning, they are desperate to add pieces to be better. At the same time, I think he said it in a way where it rubbed me the wrong way because it almost felt like the Lightning are going to get swindled by a Canadian team. It's one of those things where I feel like it was the Lightning were just going to bend the knee to whatever demands the Calgary Flames were going to throw their way. At the same time, I think he very much downplayed the Lightning's trade chips in terms of draft picks. I think, like I said, and maybe I'm being a little bit pompous in how I feel about this. If you look at my trade deadline proposal that I put on Twitter, and I could try and find it real quick as I'm talking to you guys and gals about this, but I think what I put up for the trade thing, the hypothetical trade with the Flames, I think is more than appealing for the Flames. So just to refresh, and then I'll wrap up my mini rant about this because it really did bother me. The Bolts would take Noah Hannafin and Blake Coleman with Coleman's with 15% of his salary retained by the Flames. The Flames would receive Alex Barré-Boulet, Tyler Mott, Brent Seabrook's contract, a 2024 seventh round pick that is originally from Chicago, a 2025 second round pick that is the Lightning, and a 2026 first round pick that is the Lightning. Now, if you're asking for more than that, then you are completely out of touch with how a trade in anything. It doesn't even have to be sports. It could just be between two people exchanging items. I think that is more than sufficient and more than favorable for the Flames, who are a team who are completely out of it, and the Lightning, who are kind of still in the middle of trying to get back to prominence. So let me know in the comments below how you felt about those comments made about the Flames reporter. I believe I would assume he covers the Flames if he's commenting on this. And let me know how you took it, because I think that it's one of those things where it kind of almost makes you question, is there an ulterior motive in terms of, is he trying to, no pun intended, fan the flames of trying to get the Flames to maybe, or the Lightning to succumb easily to these demands, or whatever the case may be. I mean, the fact that we're even talking about it is blasphemous enough. I would be shocked. I think Julian Brees-Boss, I don't think Jeff Vinik would ever allow Brees-Boss to make this trade anyway. And I think he's smart enough to not make this trade, because the fan base would go absolutely ballistic, and I would spend the next episode right after that trade just blasting him. So let me know in the comments how you feel about that. And coming up in just a little bit, we're going to wrap things up with talking about the easier choice, another outlet which I love, possibly suggesting the Lightning going back and getting some old familiar faces. All that coming up in just a little bit. But first, I'm going to talk about our last sponsors of the day, and that is our friends over at eBay Motors. Now, listen, passion, drive, and patience is what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So one last time, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to our podcast. We're available wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Join our Discord server as well. Join in the conversation. And so before I get into the last segment, I just want to just clarify one last time what I said, so it doesn't get taken the wrong way. What I was trying to say when I was talking about, Canadian hockey writers, I feel like almost they look down on the American teams still, and they just feel like the American teams, almost to me at least, as an American, so maybe I'm a little biased here with that, but I feel like some Canadian writers or hockey personalities feel like the American franchises are not as smart as they are. They feel superior to the American franchises and just feel like uh, these players are going to want to come to Canada, which is completely the opposite of what is going on in reality. And I mean, that's the reason why we haven't seen a Canadian team win a Stanley Cup since the 90s. So that tells you everything you need to know. So that's really what it was. It wasn't a shot at anyone for being Canadian. It wasn't a shot at any of my awesome other colleagues that are Canadian, whether they cover the hockey teams, whether they cover the Raptors, whatever the case may be, had nothing to do with that. And they know that. They know me pretty well. So wrapping things up, talking about another article or another outlet, which is something I hate to do most times, but I'm talking about it because I actually love this article because it is so along the lines of kind of almost the quote unquote lightning way. And this is from, if you want to follow along, the Hockey Writers, awesome outlet if you don't know anything about them. Awesome hockey outlet. Definitely want to check that out. And this article was written 2 days ago by a writer by the name of Jim Bay, and it's titled "Lightning Mock Trade Deadline for 2024." And interesting conversation being had in this, and basically it goes on to outline the basically what the Lightning have to offer versus what they could do, and a couple of interesting scenarios here. So the first one is obviously the one that we would like the most, and that is the Lightning getting Hannafin and a second round pick in the 2024 entry draft for from the Flames in exchange for the Lightning's first round pick in 26. Which, I mean, if that's all it takes to get Hannafin, I'm all for it. I don't think I would, if I were a Flames fan, I would be very upset about that trade, to be honest, because I thought maybe my trade proposal was a little bit more generous, and probably maybe, I mean, who knows what's going to happen, a little bit of more along the lines of what is more realistic. It also goes on to talk about, the Lightning adding some forward depth. And this is where it kind of took a left turn for me. And I'm not saying it's a bad idea. It's just not something I don't think maybe some Lightning fans would be interested in at this time. It goes on to talk about the Lightning could possibly go after Tyler Johnson in exchange for their third round pick in the 2025 NHL draft. I like the idea. Quite frankly, my issue with that is that and TJ was awesome here in Tampa Bay, but though that last couple of playoff runs, and maybe it's just I don't forget, and I really mean this in a sincere way. I'm not trying to be underhanded. Those last couple of playoff performances that he had really just didn't leave a good taste in my mouth. And it's one of those things where I feel like, if it didn't end well performance-wise for you, now is not the time to kind of experiment again. Let's see if this works out again. I'm not into that. I'm sure there's some fans out there that feel the same way, because at the end of the day, then we're just going to have another Connor Sheary. And I don't want that. I've been throwing it out there the last couple episodes. We've seen it twice over the last 3 years. Vlad Domestikov, absolute dud. Connor Sheary, just a ghost out there. Put out the wanted posters. I and I don't want that situation with Tyler Johnson. I really don't care what his numbers are. Um, he has 13 goals and 6 assists on the season on a bad Blackhawks team. So that's not really impressive to me. So I'm going to pass. The other one that they had on here, every Lightning fan in theory would love this. I wasn't really a big fan probably the last year, I would say. But this one basically goes on and talks about bringing back Pat Maroon in exchange for a 7th round pick. I mean, right away. And plus, he's been out since February 7th because he got back surgery. So right there should be a hard no for me. But he's 35 years old. You know, love Pat, love his enthusiasm, lovable guy in the locker room, but at the same time, I mean, that doesn't work for me. That doesn't work for really the Lightning. That's not what the Lightning are looking for at this time. They already have enough guys like that. They have enough leadership. They don't need a guy who's going to come in here and be physical. And he's 35. He's run down. You need to start getting younger. You know, if the Lightning were a cup contender, and for whatever reason, I mean, they have enough guys that are sandpaper on this team that are grizzled, that could step up, answer the bell. This team needs to get faster. They need to get more agile. They have enough guys that could go up there and be the tough guy. They don't need another Pat Maroon. You know, he's not in Tampa anymore for a reason. That's basically the nice way of putting it. But they're all good ideas, especially obviously the one about Hannafin. And I kind of contradicting myself, obviously, because I want to bring back Blake Coleman, but I feel like that's a little bit of a different thing because he does add that offensive element there. And if, you know, you look at Coleman versus Tyler Johnson, you can't compare the two. So let me know in the comments below how you feel. I mean, I think that this is slowly going to evolve into a conversation of what former Lightning player should we bring back that would benefit this team in the long run, which is a conversation I would love to have. I mean, I'm never opposed to bringing back a former player, especially when they were here when the Lightning won their cups, as long as it makes sense for the current situation that the Tampa Bay Lightning are in. So let me know in the comments below. Let me know on the Discord server. Let me know on the Reddit. Let me know on Twitter. Let me know anywhere where you could get in touch with the show, and I'll address it. I mean, we got a couple of days to play with here. The Lightning don't play till Thursday, so everything's on the table. Everything's on the table right now. So we'll be back tomorrow, obviously, to talk more about trades. I think we'll definitely open up that we'll go down that rabbit hole of former Lightning players that could contribute, that could possibly come back here on Friday. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.